is just massive market moves that are really not justified and are fairly inefficient and unexplainable from a fundamental standpoint, but a lot about the structure of the market and the way things swing quickly. And that ties into when we talk about where we're at right now and the summary of kind of what happened in 2020 just so perfectly. And so we're going to jump into that as we do the investment consulting piece. But that's really it. That's my take on the Reddit story. It's the GameStop stock and AMC stock this week and their big moves. But cool things we can talk about there if anybody wants to do it as a one-off. So we'll go ahead and jump on in for the sake of time. So we have really, as always, three areas we're going to go through. We're going to do investment consulting. So where are we now? What does our outlook look like for 2021? An advanced planning idea. We're going to talk about this concept of a family brand and how that can help your family better define your values, relationships, and even possibly help you increase the net worth of the family. And then relationship management, we have two guest speakers from the Right Move Senior Resource, Kelly Walker and then also Derek, who are just awesome and knowledgeable about the whole idea of care as you age. So we'll get some wise input from them also. So to start with, and this is where I was going to tie this into the Reddit story, markets are not always valued in the short term how they should be, although I believe they're very efficient, good mechanisms in the long run. And what we'll see is there's a little bit of dislocation at times. And last year was certainly a year where we had some dislocation. I mean, how could you describe walking into a grocery store and not being able to buy toilet paper as anything except dislocated from what we consider normal? And this is the S&P 500 over 2020. So if you look at it, and we're going to talk about this a little bit when we talk about what might happen this year, look at this huge pullback we had. But then look at this massive recovery. And so what's amazing to me, and the takeaway I want to get with this is, I think overall markets are efficient over a long period of time and price very well. But over a short period amount of time, they can be very dislocated. And you can't tell me that this was priced correctly, and you can't tell me that this is or isn't priced correctly. We'll only learn when we look at it in the future. At the time, I didn't know sitting there in March that this was not priced correctly. But what's amazing and the takeaway I get from this is the importance of being a long-term investor and sticking to your fundamentals. And what a year, better than any year in my professional career or any year I've studied, to teach us that principle and how important it is. And then going into 2021, and we're going to talk a little bit about why, what are our expectations? So one thing that's expected, and it makes a lot of sense, is really good corporate earnings in 2021. And a lot of that has to do with pent-up demand, markets opening back up, economies opening back up with the vaccine. And when you have earnings come down like we did last year, when things get back to normal, it's easy to grow fast from that area. So there's actually an expected record earning year for the S&P 500 going into 2021. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily mean the stock market's going to go well, but it does support stock market valuations. And then here's the growth forecast for the upcoming year, 5.7%. That's a fantastic GDP number, but it's not as good as it may sound when you consider that last year we shrunk at 4%. So if we grow at 5.7, we'll just barely get above what we lost. But then because of that, would be a good expectation going into 2022 as well. And let me say one thing about this. When we talk about these growth expectations, that does not mean it's not already priced in the market. And because we get that growth, it's always going to parallel. Because last year when we were shrinking, we saw some pretty good rallies, right? And here's why. This is what's expected. And markets are forward-looking. Therefore, no one's going to be surprised if this happens. We might be surprised if we get 7% GDP growth. We might be surprised negatively if we only get 3%. But no one's going to be surprised if it's 5.7. That is the expectation. But then here's the most comforting and, in my opinion, optimistic slide of the entire presentation. So if you look at the S&P 500, and you look at its overall valuations, people a lot of times talk, how many times earnings is something valued? So let me give you an example of how to easily break that down. If you earn $100 and your stock is trading at $900, that's 9 times earnings. There you go. Assuming, you got to divide it by number of shares and stuff like that. But it's really that simple. It's just that stocks, do it on a much larger scale. And what you're looking at now, when you look at these valuations, and I'm looking at this part of the slide, the top 10, how high those are compared to historical norms. The top 10 companies in the S&P 500 definitely look expensive and overvalued. However, the remaining 490, especially with good growth and low inflation and low interest rates, don't look all that bad. So what this is telling me is that, yes, there are things that are expensive, but there are also things that are cheap. And one of the rotations that I believe you're going to see throughout this year, and we already positioned y'all's portfolio with a new position you might look at if you log into your account with us, DOD AX or DODGX, excuse me, different share classes with the A. What you're going to see there is better positioning on the value side of the index that's a little less expensive right now. And those are a lot of the companies that maybe didn't do as well in a COVID environment, but are going to be fine once we move on to the next thing. And then this is just something I want to remind all of us going into this year. We've kind of become spoiled. And so I want to reflect on this concept by looking at this chart. We've become spoiled because we haven't had a good pullback since March. And I mean, we've had pretty much a straight line up, maybe a couple weeks one way or the other, but normal markets are often 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And sometimes even in a really good year, you can also have a big pullback. So let me show you how this chart works. So what we're talking about here in the top bars, and notice there are negative years, is what was the return of the S&P 500 for a calendar year. However, these red numbers down here are what was the biggest pullback you saw from in that given year. So if you think about it, last year, for example, and here we are, we made 16%. So what that means is if you had, let's say, $100,000 invested on January 1st of 2016, and you left it just invested in the S&P 500 all year, by December 31st, it would be $116,000, okay? But as you know, there was a ride in between. And that ride at one point means it would have pulled back 34%. That's what this is saying. So like here in 19, there was a time where money lost 7%. So if we go backwards, that pullback, it's not saying from this point, it's saying from this point here to there, but then here would be the whole year. So I hope that helps. But what this is getting at is we can have pullbacks, and very rarely does the market not end up eventually higher than those, often within even the calendar year. And look at all these times where we had pullbacks. And this isn't even cherry-picked years, guys. This is year by year back to 1980. Look at some of these big ones like this, and it still ended up positive. And even big ones like this, the financial crisis, you still ended up considerably higher by the end of the year than at the worst time. So just a reminder, and I would say go ahead and get yourself ready for a little bit more volatility, not volatility we can predict and try to time in the portfolio, but simply more than we've been used to because we've been at such historical lows there. It would just be abnormal for us to continue this. All right, more good news for the economy here. On top of earnings looking good, household debt ratios and household net worth is looking historically great also. So what did people do in COVID this past year? Well, they didn't spend money because they weren't going on the trips and doing all the things that they wanted to do. And I can't tell you how many of y'all I've talked to, and they're saying, man, my savings are great because I didn't do all these things I was going to do, and now I'm going to go make this large purchase, or I'm planning this big trip towards the end of the year. And so when you see that, and that's really this chart over here, what that tells me is consumers are in a place where they can spend. And I didn't understand this historical connection until this year, But when you look at the raving 20s, that's really what happened. And, I didn't understand the connection between the Spanish flu and the raving 20s until I now look at COVID and what might be the roaring 20s of the 2020s and realize that you get this when people go through something like we have, you have all this pent-up demand, savings on the sideline, and the ability to spend and do things and want to do those as soon as everything's over. And I mean, I know and you guys are welcome to share it in the chat, but I know I'm excited to do things and thinking about doing things that I in a normal year might not even think are that amazing. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, you mean I can go to the Fox Theater or a movie again? Wow, I want to do that. Whereas a normal year, I might even go a whole year without even going to the movie theater. But and then there's this one, household net worth. And this really tells the story of the two Americas. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a corrupt thing. It's just a thing. We're moving in this area where people that have owned stocks are able to really greatly increase their net worth over people that have not. And so what you're seeing is in a year like this, let's take it, you might not even have a job. Like a lot of you guys, you're retired, but you're wealthier now than you were a year ago because the stock market's gone up. Where someone else might be working and not wealthier than they were a year ago because they lost their job and haven't found a new one. So what you're seeing is people that own stocks, that has helped their net worth as this goes through. So again, more capacity to purchase things. And then the labor market, continuing to improve much faster than in past recessions, which leads us to believe more evidence of faster recovery than past recessions. And then this is one of the coolest slides. Let's see. Oh, yeah, sorry, I moved the videos on my screen. Global manufacturing continues to improve. So look at these manufacturing numbers up and down here across the years, obviously. I mean, look where we were on manufacturing numbers going into COVID and how it just dropped off a cliff. And with that, now it's starting to recover. Again, positive sign. And then look at this, and this is going to lead into eventually when we start talking about inflation and why inflation's starting to creep up in a way that really doesn't worry us, and I don't think should worry you as investors either. But we'll talk about it. So this is the manufacturing number, okay? However, here's the supplier delivery number. So down here, so basically what it's saying is we're picking up on how much stuff we want to get manufactured, but we're not delivering that. And why are we not delivering it? Well, if you think about a lot of products, cars come to mind, big products, cars, boats, homes come to mind on this type of stuff. It might be that there's, computers. I mean, I know Microsoft earlier this year, they ran out of Surfaces they could sell. Sony PlayStation was nearly impossible to get because they just couldn't get the parts on it. And so what this is showing is, maybe let's say you're Sony, you're building a PlayStation, you can get all, of the 100 parts that go into that PlayStation, you can get 98 of them, but you can't get the other 2 because of some type of supply chain disruption. Well, now you can't build your PlayStation. And what that is showing is that that's starting to bottleneck, which is also why you're seeing this happen, which is input prices going up. So, think back to Sony PlayStation here, they're missing those 2 parts. Well, guess what? They're probably willing to pay a little bit more to get it because I'd rather cut my margins and have something I can sell than not have anything to sell at all. And so input prices for manufacturing and raw materials has gone up. So think lumber. Anybody who's trying to do home repair, build a fence, build a deck, you're seeing this. Because that industry was not creating as much lumber as they typically do, prices are through the roof. And so what that is creating now is, for the first time in a while, some true inflation expectations that are more almost changing the trend from this downward line, which is what we've seen since 2010 all the way to 2021. And here's why that doesn't worry me too much. So this is from the Federal Reserve. And what they highlighted when they're talking about the inflation disruptions is Supply chain disruptions escalated amid supplier shortages and transportation delays stemming from a lack of available drivers and COVID-19 travel restrictions. Okay, great. So why does this not bother me? Well, it doesn't bother me because it seems like a problem that's going to get fixed. And it's not we're not having hyperinflation because the U.S. government keeps borrowing. We're not having hyperinflation because we keep printing money at the Fed. We're having inflation because of supply chain issues. And that goes very well in line with my belief on inflation, which is also very common now amongst economists. It might not have been as common amongst economists 20 or 30 years ago, but that is money supply does not create inflation. Supply shortages create inflation. So let's go back to household net worth here. That was not creating inflation. It's supply. So let's go back to my favorite toilet paper analogy. You know, if you really needed some toilet paper and you couldn't get it, would you be willing to pay more for toilet paper? Yes, because there wasn't a supply of it. But if normal supply is in order, I'm not willing to pay more. You know, if Kroger jacks their price, I can walk across the street and buy it from Publix instead. And so they're not. They're going to meet an equilibrium there. So you're going to see these numbers. Don't let it frighten you and don't let it worry you too much. And then also one other thing, and this is just something I wanted to throw out as far as us starting to build a little bit of an international position in the portfolio. A little bit more on the emerging market side than we almost had none of before is, so we did the Dodge and Cox where we went from kind of the expensive growth side of the S&P 500 to the value side. And really, we didn't change allocations target there. We just kind of sold some profits to do this. Here with the emerging markets, what you're seeing is when you compare currencies right now, EM currencies at the highest level versus the dollar since 1997. That's really, I mean, it may or may not be good for their economy, but you get a little bit of a boost when you invest there as a U.S. investor because you take those earnings and you bring them back to U.S. dollars. It's just a weird thing of how international investing works. But it's also a good sign that if our dollar's low compared to other currencies, that not only are we going to make stuff to replace our manufacturing, but we can also export a little more. So in recap, when we're thinking about 2021, I think there's a lot of tailwinds for the economy, and we ran through several of them. Outside of the political landscape, those all just exist in the natural world. And so, one thing besides being a long-term investor, I challenge and advise each of you to do is we've had so much political talk. Disconnect your portfolio from that and look at what's actually happening with companies, markets, and economies, not necessarily anything that does or doesn't happen in Washington. And there could be some tailwinds that come out of that. There could be some headwinds that come out of that. Tailwinds, for example, more stimulus. Headwinds, for example, tax increases. But you're still going to have the real economy moving forward for all these natural reasons, which you can really analyze. I mean, one thing I've learned over the past few months here is don't try to predict what politicians are actually going to do. Invest based on fundamentals, right? So, all right. So that's it on investment consulting. Does anybody have any questions they would like to put into the chat to review on that side? And Juliana, just take a look and see if we get anything before I move on, because I want to make sure we address these while we're in the segment.
I sure will. There aren't any questions so far.
Well, then I did a perfect job explaining this. I'm just so glad nobody asked me if they should buy AMC or GameStop stock. So apparently y'all aren't all that excited about it. But all right, here's our planning idea. Let's talk about this. I'm going to read some lines from it. What this made me kind of think of, it probably depends where you are on the wealth spectrum, how you want to do it, but I think we can all benefit from this well, actually, hold on. I see some stuff come in here. Lewis Wider, move to international to what percent? Lewis, I would have to, because there's various models we run, and I'm happy to get you that number for your own portfolio, reference what it is. However, we didn't change the overall percentage by much. We changed what we have in that area is allocated. So kept the percent fairly similar with different funds and ETFs in there. And then to Bill, do you think there will be pressure on energy prices, and will that have an impact on the market? That's a great question. If energy gets expensive enough, obviously, like we had in '08, that can impact the market as far as, and this is just my opinion on it, eventually it gets to bothering consumers. They don't have money to spend in other places. They don't want to drive as much, et cetera. Right now, I feel like until the economy opens up a little bit, we're still using a lot less gas and oil and gas than normal. And so I don't see it getting so expensive that it will absolutely, hinder other things. But that's certainly possible and something I'll keep, and you guys all should keep an eye on. Okay. All right. So the many benefits of building a family brand, and I can see this being very different and very important depending on what phase of life you're in, how old your children are, how old your parents and other loved ones may be, how close-knit you are with extended family like siblings and things like that. But it's really taken the way a lot of corporations and a lot of businesses are running their business now to have meaning. And in a second, when we talk to Derek and Kelly, you'll hear a lot about that why and that meaning behind what they do. And, we're really learning in the business world how important that is. It's not just to have profits, but to have purpose. People who feel like they're making an impact are more productive, they work harder, they're more inspired. I know for me, I love the money I make being a financial advisor, but I also love helping you guys all day. And if you removed the aspect of helping people from it, it just wouldn't be as motivating, right? And sometimes some of those things and just, little things here and there and seeing that difference in your lives as much as motivating is the money. So you got to balance these things. But the founder of the Campfire Effect, Chris Smith, says that the crucial driver to create a healthier connection, better leaders, greater prosperity, and stronger overall society is how intentional each family, and I love this, each family is defining what they believe, value, and stand for. And here's what I took out of that line, each family. There's a lot of influences on your family. There's going to be the schools they go to. There's going to be their friends. There's going to be social media. There's going to be your church and other faith-based institutions. All these influencers are coming in, and it's really, for you as a family, how to digest that and input it, something you can intentionally do, and the way you do that impacts society. So let's say somebody, I'll give you a great example. Let's say your child's getting picked on in high school. Well, that kid could grow up and be a bully himself because he was picked on, or you can be intentional about talking about how that's not the right way to treat people. And instead of fighting back, we're going to, kill them with kindness, so to say. And when you think about your money, the brand extends beyond money. But let's talk about it getting into it. There's really kind of three areas that he talks about in this article. And y'all have this emailed out. I think we have it on do we have this posted on our blog on our website also?
I believe so. I can send out the link if they have not seen it, or send out a copy of it.
They could go there if they want to. Yeah. So divide it into these three areas. What is your culture? What is your language? And what experiences do you want? And one thing he talks about, and this is a great line, armed with clarity about what matters most, children can potentially use inherited wealth not just to live more authentic and meaningful lives, but also to better support their communities instead of letting the money ruin them. Think back to the people you know. I bet all of you know people who have inherited money and they just squander it or fight over it. And then brother and sister no longer get along after mom and dad have passed away. And there's no reason to leave somebody something that makes their life worse. And part of this family brand and the idea about it is, how do you get them thinking positively and making these good decisions? And depending on where you're at in life, if I was a lot of you guys in my later year, 65 and older, and my children are in their 20s, 30s, or 40s, I would say do this in collaboration with your children. If you're my age, I need to do this with my wife, but I don't necessarily want to ask my 3-year-old and 6-year-old what they think our family brand should be. They would probably say Legos. My job is to keep them from only thinking about themselves, right? So a line that jumped out at me on the culture here, and I kind of said this earlier, but culture is taking a stand for how you connect as a family. Make no mistake, there is a culture that exists in your home right now, even if you never defined it. And that jumped on me because when you think of it that way, you got a culture. Is it intentional or not, right? And then language. How do you talk to one another? And how important can that be? And I want to read a line here, and then I want to share some anecdotal stuff I've seen with our clients. If you grew up in a home where can't and what you should be doing were common phrases, one environment was created. One that is very different from the environment created in a home where you got this and anything is possible, is commonly said. How cool is that? And just thinking about, even if you're trying to say the same thing, phrasing it different. And the story I was going to tell on this, I see so much in you guys and how you invest and how comfortable y'all are with things like market pullbacks, how either frugal or spending you are. When I learn more about y'all's families, I see so much of your parents, often who I've never met, in your behavior. And so often people who are good investors, they learn that from their parents. So often people who are bad investors, they learn that from their parents. And, know that these things get observed and picked up. And then finally, experiences. And think about this, to me, and COVID at least, has made this so darn apparent. Those bucket list things, you never know when you will or won't be able to do them. And so making those, in the way he uses it, most of us are on autopilot with our traditions, but making them intentional. What are the things you can count on? What are the things that really matter the most? And not necessarily all big ones, but what is the most important one to you? So like a tradition I've tended to have with my kids is going to breakfast. And I hope that those are, times they remember later on. So anyway, cool article, cool concept. And I tell you what, if your kids, and it doesn't apply to everybody, but if your kids are people who need some of these lessons and conversations before possibly getting your money, you could make a generational difference. Statistically, almost over half of inheritance is spent within the first 18 months, and even in uber wealthy families, so we're talking 50 million and above, wealth is squandered by the third generation, earned in the first, maintained by the second, squandered by the third on average. So just think about that stuff when you think about this lasting legacy. All right, so let's jump on over to Kelly and Derek, and this is maybe your favorite part of the presentation because it's actually interactive, which is more interesting than talking to or watching one talking head. So Kelly and Derek, thank you for being here. I'm first of all, y'all want to say hello just so we can make sure your audio is working?
Yeah, hey guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting us have if you can hear us, give me a big nod because I know you guys are on mute. There we go. I like it.
We definitely can. So tell me, just to start off with, tell the group what y'all do and why you do it.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, David, for letting us jump on here. I appreciate it. And I started to take notes, but I think it might be easier if do you guys send out the video of this? Because I'd love to have it as far as the recording, just so I can go back and review all that stuff you just talked about, because it was great. But yes, who we are. Thank you so much. We are the Right Move Senior Resource. Our number one goal and passion is to help families find the appropriate care for their aging loved ones. Part of my catchphrase when I'm talking to people about what we do is I reference financial planners. I say, I think we do a great job of planning for retirement. I think we do a good job of spending time on webinars, learning how to invest our money and things like that. But I don't think we like to address what happens in the last 5 years of life or so, and the care needs that might come up, the decisions you might have to make, the financial implications of those decisions, and just what exactly you do when someone needs more care than what they can provide at home. And so that's who we are at the core. Again, we connect families to care. What are those types of services? The biggest thing we do is placement service. So we help families find the appropriate senior living option. But we also help families find care in the homes, elder care attorneys, VA benefits, Medicaid benefits. Really, we're just kind of a one-stop shop to help connect families to care. And to explain a little bit about the placement side, the biggest thing we do, I'll share a story. And I apologize, I'm the son of a preacher, so I get a little long-winded. I might talk a little bit too much, but I think it's best that I share a story, and I think that'll explain what placement is. So my background was in hospice care, and I was helping out a family, a lady named Mrs. Jones. And part of my job was to meet with families and explain what hospice is, what it did, what services it provided. And while we're sitting there talking about hospice for her husband who had dementia, her phone was just ringing and ringing. I mean, I'm telling 15 times in a 5-minute conversation, her phone rang. And finally I said, Mrs. Jones, if you need to stop and answer the phone, you can. And she looked at me and she says, no, no, no. She said, I broke down last night. I went online and I searched assisted living and memory care in Cumming, Georgia. And she said, I put my information on there because I've got to find somewhere for him to go. I can't do it anymore. I'm overwhelmed. I'm too old to care for him. I put my information out there, and lo and behold, today, my phone has not stopped ringing the entire time. So I looked at Mrs. Jones. I said, listen, I know these communities. I've been in and out of them with hospice. I know who's doing a good job. I know what they cost. Why don't we get in my car tomorrow? We'll go take a look at 2 or 3 that I think would fit what you guys need. And that's what we did. So I started this business just helping Mrs. Jones fill a need. I later went back and found out how these online lead generator companies get paid and things like that. And that's where I developed the business. We come alongside a family. We understand they need to find senior living. We talk about budget. We talk about care needs. We talk about location. We simplify that list down to a few options, and we go take a look with them and help them make a good decision.
Cool. All right, Kelly, do you have anything you want to add on your background or when people are finding a house or a place?
So I've been in the industry for 18 years. I started inside a senior living community. So I definitely know what the ins and outs are, what their processes are, how everything works. So just to kind of piggyback off of what Derek said, when we're touring with families, we do tour with all of our families. We don't send them out on their own. We keep all of their information private, so the communities don't contact them. We are their point person, and we don't charge for what we do. When someone moves into a community, we don't charge the family. The community actually pays us a referral fee for that move-in. So it just makes it a really easy process for the family to have an advocate for them that's really working alongside them to make it a smooth transition.
All right. So y'all talked about how you help them with care. We can talk about the different types. Tell us a little bit about the different types and what the average costs are for something in, say, the Atlanta area.
Sure. So there are definitely more options than there used to be. I think we all remember the days when it was only a nursing home. Either you lived at home, you lived with your family, or you went to a nursing home. Those days are long gone. There are 55 plus or active senior adult apartment complexes, which are great. And that's typically where somebody may start. They usually just provide the apartment, of course. They may have some activities, but they don't really provide a whole lot of service. Then you have independent living, which is kind of a newer concept, I guess, maybe 30 years, I guess, maybe it's been around. But independent living is where you're starting to see some services come in. So maybe they're providing some meals for the residents. They're providing transportation. They're including utilities and the cost of the apartment so the senior doesn't have to worry about that. And there's somebody in the building 24 hours a day. So it's just another level of service that the senior can get. Then you have assisted living and personal care homes. So at that point, the senior may need some help with medication assistance or dressing, bathing. Of course, activities are still a huge part of what they do. Transportation is provided. So there's just, again, every time you move up in the type of community that you need, you're moving up that level of service. And so you see that reflected in the cost as well, which we'll get into in just a second. And then you have memory care. Memory care communities are a very important part of senior living at this point, when we're seeing such an increase of dementia, Alzheimer's, and different memory loss issues that people are having. So memory care, you have a separate unit typically that is secured. So those who might, be exit seeking, or, just not safe in a normal environment, they can be in a secured area and have staff that are specially trained to assist them, which is a huge part of what they do there. And then you still do have skilled nursing or nursing homes that are around today. But I do want to let you know, only 10% of people who are in assisted living or personal care or memory care ever have to go to nursing homes. So it's really not, it doesn't have to be oh, I'm definitely going to have to go to a nursing home someday. It's only 10% that ever have to leave. So it's really fortunate that that's the case. And at skilled nursing, at that point, you need medical care 24 hours a day available to you. So it's just, another level of care that is provided there.
You said something that generated a question for me, and I was going to ask what points of research should they do, but I want to make sure we get to that. But when you said only 10% need to go to nursing home, and tell me if this is valid, because it might impact when someone goes into care. Seems like we had an experience with my grandmother recently where, as long as we got her into the home and she was accepted, we knew she could stay there the rest of her life. But if she couldn't get admitted, she was probably going to have to end up in a nursing home. Any thoughts on an experience like that?
Yes, that's very true. So you do have a window, because the state has requirements for being appropriate for assisted living or memory care. So once you go past that window of when you're appropriate, then unfortunately skilled is the only other option for you. So there are state requirements that have to be met, but once you are in assisted living or memory care, they typically allow you to stay in what they call age in place. So you can bring in hospice services, you can bring in extra things that you may need to allow the state to be able to let you stay in that assisted living or memory care and not have to go to a nursing home.
Well, and then when people are looking at the properties, besides the obvious stuff, what are some points of research that you think they need to make sure they're paying attention to?
I think for us, that's something that we really work hard on when we start talking to families, is what are those critical things we want to make sure that are on your list? If, and I think sometimes people don't think about it. If you have a dog or some kind of pet that you absolutely love, you want to make sure it's pet friendly. You want to make sure that that's available to you. You want to, if you love to go to swimming class and aqua aerobics, you want to make sure there's a pool on the premises. So there's just different things that when you look at your lifestyle, you want to make sure that that community is going to check all those boxes. And that's part of what we do. All of there's a community on every corner now. It is just exploding. And so you can spend forever calling all of those places, and it is a lot of work. So one thing that we do is, we can take that off of your shoulders. We know their pricing. We know if they have availability, we know, all of those things. So you're not having to do that work, because it's a lot.
Yeah. And I'll jump on. So there's that core group of what we ask families up front. Obviously, that core group is price, location, care needs, and can they provide the care needs. Those are kind of the basic ones we start with. But just like Kelly said, pet friendly, one floor living versus multi-floor living, what types of activities, what types of outings do they do. So really it's budget, location, care needs first, and then it's lifestyle and what do you want. And here in the Atlanta area, you have options everywhere. And so that's part of what we do. Our needs assessment conversation, I like to try to get it down shorter, but it's always an hour or almost 2 hours with an individual going over exactly what they need and want and what they're looking for. That way we can tailor specifically for them.
Is having a happy hour a consistent request?
Always. Are you kidding?
Huge.
Always. Socialization is the biggest things about senior living, and getting from, mom's been at home by herself and people visit weekly versus mom is now involved with so many activities, so many friends, and happy hour.
And I remember y'all telling me a consistent story you see is people don't want to go, they complain, and then about a month or two into it, they love it because of the socialization.
Yeah, and their families are having to make appointments to see them because they're so busy with all the activities and things that they're doing at the community. My grandmother is actually a perfect case. I've been in the industry forever, and she absolutely refused to move into a community, said that she would just die if she ever moved. And after a month, she was loving it. She has a boyfriend now, and she is just like the poster child for senior living. So,
wow. Yeah. The dating scene for senior living, I hear, is quite the scene. So that's why you also, back to family brand and other stuff, want to make sure your estate documents are in place and thorough before your mom and dad get in there and something weird happens.
Yes,
right.
yes.
You don't want new beneficiaries getting listed at that point. So that leads into a question I wanted to ask you, and I think I didn't even realize when we were putting these together that this ties so well into the family brand also, and just kind of puts these two together. But all right, if a family disagrees on what the best care is for mom and dad, what should they do?
You, me?
Go ahead.
I'll jump on that for a second. So that is every situation. If there's more than one child involved, we are playing counselor and we're playing referee more so than actually helping them find the right senior living option. Because it never fails. The one that hasn't been helping as much now feels guilty and wants to have the biggest input of what's going to happen with mom and dad. So when that situation happens, it's all the time. We try to sit down. If we can sit around a table, obviously with COVID, that's kind of changed a lot. So a lot of Zoom calls or meetings like this, but we try to get all parties sit down at one spot. And then we try to play mediator, where let's talk first and foremost about what mom and dad's needs are and their budget, and then location between the siblings that might visit. And so we got to narrow down the three basics at that point in time. And then we've got to talk with each child as far as, okay, you're saying you want that. Is that more for you, or is that more for mom and dad? Or are you just trying to get at your sister for what's been going on the last 20 years? So literally we sit down and we play counselor with almost every family that we deal with. When people apply for jobs with us, it's a full gamut of what I say your job description is, because you just never know what you're going to see.
Yeah. Well, in plug for professional advisors, whether it be estate planning attorneys, whether it be people like yourselves, CPAs, somebody like us, that when there are those conflicts, you can really be an unbiased mediator because there's less emotion, right? You don't have the baggage that we're all going to bring in. And again, and I keep holding this article up, but it doesn't come through with the virtual background. It's why you have your family brand, so that the siblings don't have to fight, right?
Yeah.
But they'll still fight. Don't worry about that. So I always like talking about my kids, so I'll talk about them for a second. But every day when my son gets on the bus at 6:50, the first thing my daughter does now is go and play with his Legos. And she goes, because Luke's not here, I'm going to play with his Legos. So that just shows how siblings are going to always be siblings.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about, you mentioned COVID, and actually I see a question that came in, so we'll go ahead and address this, and then COVID and then wrap up. Do you guys provide your services in other states?
So we don't, as far as have offices in other states. We can assist out of state. What we do, and especially what we've learned this year, is we can do a lot of what we do by phone. I don't like that. I'm a very in-person kind of guy. But we can do a lot of what we do by phone. But we are part of a national organization called the NPRA. It's a national organization of people just like us who I think are focused on the family first and finding the right options. So we can connect families with people like us in other areas. I've had to rely on some from my own grandparents up in Wisconsin. We've helped people in Tennessee, North Carolina, Florida. So we can help, and we can find someone to help in other states.
Yeah. Well, let's AB, because you mentioned these other states and kind of a network of this. working with somebody like you guys who is a little more personal, a little more boutique, how is that different than like a place for mom kind of experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main difference is going to be that we, first of all, do not give your information out. So if you are doing anything online with a big national company, typically they'll ask you for your information. And what they do is they then send that to every community in the area that you're wanting to look at. So for example, if you are looking in Alpharetta and Roswell, they'll send your contact information to typically 6 communities in each city. So you can be expecting at least 12 phone calls. When your loved one is in the hospital and you're dealing with all of that, plus you're getting 12 to 18 phone calls if you're looking in 3 different cities that are in the same general area, that's a lot. And it just becomes really overwhelming. They also don't tour with their families, and we tour with all of our families. So when you go into these communities, you have an advocate with you who is there to support you. Take notes so you don't have to. We want the families to really pay attention to the building, to the staff, to the other residents. How it feels in there, how it feels to you is so important. And so we're taking notes and doing all those kind of administrative things to take that off of you. So there's a lot just more personalization and hand holding that a large company like that just simply can't do.
Guy, you gave me PTSD on buying a car and putting your information in online and getting like 20 car salesmen calling. Ew.
No, it's never ending. And they'll continue to follow up. It's not like a one-time call. They're told to continue to call you ongoing.
All right. Well, even though we're all sick probably of talking about COVID, it's so like, how do you not a little bit? So how is that impacting your business and these types of communities in general? In your opinion?
It was a huge deal last year, obviously. When it kind of hit in March and everybody locked down, for us, so many of our community partners just pushed pause on allowing new residents to move in. So they needed to get an idea of, how do we get what we need to protect our staff? How do we protect our residents? What are the protocols and procedures we need to put in place? Because, assisted livings didn't require, gowns or gloves or masks or anything like a nursing home or a hospital might be prepared for. And so they weren't really prepared for an outbreak of a virus type thing. So they pushed pause until they tried to figure things out. So for us, we had to tell families, hey, there's no one accepting new residents, so let's just wait for a second. Once they started to open up, I think the questions from families started to differ. It more of, okay, which communities have COVID in it? Do we know that? And so we had to start tracking through the state of which communities had COVID inside of it. Are they allowing visitation? That was a big deal.
Yeah.
If I move mom or dad in, can I even come see them? Are they going to be, isolated in their apartment? Are they allowed to do activities with other residents? Can I see mom or dad? And I think that was probably the biggest deal, and still is to this day, is if mom moves into this community, what's visitation like? And so those few things have now changed when we're searching for communities where we're asking about COVID in the building, visitation, your isolation, or when you move in a community, how long do they have to stay in their apartment before they can allow to be out and around? And then vaccines. So there's so many new questions that our families are asking that we're just having to figure out and walk them throughout this whole process.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. This has been very informative. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should, or that you want to be sure the group hears before we wrap up?
I think just, we talked about a little bit, David, when we talked the other day about when you should start looking. And I just want to just mention a few things just really quick. There are some signs that you or your loved one probably need to start looking at senior living. One is lack of socialization with the isolation from COVID. That's been a huge issue for people. So lack of socialization is a big one. Not safe in the home. Their safety awareness has declined. Maybe they'll open the door for anyone, Maybe they're leaving their oven on, things like that. That's something that's really important. That's a safety issue that you want to make sure you're watching for. Housework, cooking becomes too much, not taking their medications correctly. All of those things are things that are really detrimental, and it doesn't seem, like it would be a huge deal, but if you think about it, it only takes one time for someone who has dementia to open their door, go outside, and can't remember how to get back in. And in January, that is really scary. So you have to take an honest look at your family and say, okay, is this person really safe in their home still? And we can certainly help with that.
Okay.
David, there's another question that came in. It was a private chat. So are there also familiar with home health options where the family lives at home by themselves or with a family member?
Yeah, definitely. So part of everything else we do as a resource is help connect families with care in the home. So we can advise on a wide range of services that can come into the house. Obviously, there's the skilled nursing side of things, whether it's physical therapy, occupational therapy, or a nurse that comes out to the house if medically necessary. And those types of services are paid for by insurances. But as far as like the hourly care or someone to sit with mom or dad or someone to come in and cook meals, make sure they're taking their medications for a few hours a day, those are private duty caregiving companies. And there's thousands of those licensed in the state of Georgia. So we help families narrow down to a list of 2 or 3, depending on what area they live in. And we'll let them know what the cost is going to be, who's doing a good job, and kind of get them set up for caregivers in the house. So definitely we can help families figure out, okay, mom wants to stay at home. How do we do that safely?
Yeah. And then you mentioned what those things cost and whatnot. I have a question coming in also that says price levels, question mark, question mark, question mark. And I know that varies probably anywhere from $2,000 to $20,000 a month, but how would you answer a question like that?
Sure. So when you're talking about like an active senior apartment, like a 55 plus apartment, you're looking at maybe, $1,500 to $2,500 a month, depending on what kind of apartment you would want. Independent living, you can look for, $2,000 up to $10,000 a month. Assisted living, $2,000 to $12,000 a month. Memory care, $3,000 to $12,000. Skilled nursing, you're looking at about probably $6,000 to $8,000 a month, depending on which one you choose. So there's definitely a huge variety. It just kind of depends on what your budget is, how many amenities you want, and what your lifestyle is.
Yeah. And so the average, just for numbers sake, the average assisted living apartment in the Atlanta area is about $3,300 a month. So that's kind of the average. I would say in the northern sub, like we're based out of Cumming, North Forsyth or North Fulton. I'd say your average is probably closer to $4,000 or $4,500 a month for assisted living. But that's kind of a median range that you could look to expect for assisted living here in Atlanta.
Okay. All right, guys, and consumer beware, you probably get what you pay for. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I would say so. There, with some exceptions, but I think some of the ones that get fairly high in price, you might just be paying for the building that they've built versus actual services.
True.
So if you need a lot of care, let's focus on care first. If it's more about the lifestyle, then we can talk about what they offer and versus life care, life services, things like that.
Okay, cool. That's fair. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. But Derek and Kelly, let's all give them a virtual clap.
Appreciate that.
All right. Thank you. I love seeing you guys clap. There you go. The few of you that are on screen. Thank you. All right. Well, I hope you guys are all off to a great start of the year. One of my goals this year is to hopefully see more of you in person. I'd love to do some of our meetings or even meet for lunch at some point this year. And I just am so thankful for everyone who's on here, y'all's health, and that you're, still able to come on to stuff like this and share the time with us virtually. I'm so glad that this didn't happen like 20 years ago when we wouldn't have been able to do these things virtually. Can you imagine that? But if you have any questions or need to schedule a meeting with myself or one of our other advisors, there's a QR code there you can use on your phone. Juliana will get in contact with you. And then from there, you guys just have a blessed next month. I'll see you next month, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, Dave.